The first time I saw Daniel Reyes, I wanted to punch him in the face. Not because he did anything wrong. Not really. It was more about what he represented, the kind of effortless confidence that I had spent 17 years of my life quietly resenting in other people. He walked into Mr. Patterson's 11th grade English class like he owned the air inside it, brown skin glowing under the fluorescent lights. A beat-up copy of The Alchemist tucked under one arm and a half-smile on his face. That said, he found the whole world mildly amusing. He sat down 2 seats ahead of me, turned around once to scan the room, and when his eyes landed on me, he gave me a nod. Just a nod. Casual. Easy. I looked away so fast. I nearly gave myself whiplash. My name is Marcus Webb, and this is the truest thing I have ever told anyone. I grew up in Sycamore Falls, a mid-sized town in Ohio where nothing much happened and everyone knew everything about everybody else. My father was a mechanic. My mother worked at the county clerk's office, and my older sister Danielle had already gone off to Ohio State, leaving me alone in a house that felt 3 sizes too big without her laughter filling the hallways. I was, by most visible accounts, a normal kid, decent grades, ran cross-country, had a small group of friends who mostly talked about video games and college applications. I was quiet in the way that adults called mature and other teenagers called boring. What nobody knew what I had spent for, years making absolutely sure nobody would know, was that I had been carrying a secret so heavy it had started to curve my spine. I knew what I was. I had known since I was 13, the summer I watched an old movie with my dad, and found myself unable to stop staring at the male lead. The way his jaw caught the light, the way he laughed. The recognition that rolled through me was quiet and devastating, like a tide coming in. I didn't panic, not right away. I just filed it away in the deepest drawer I had and told myself I would deal with it someday. I thought it was very far away, and then Daniel Reyes sat down 2 seats ahead of me, and someday started walking in my direction. For the first 3 weeks of school, I successfully avoided him. This was harder than it sounds because Mr. Patterson believed passionately in group work, and Daniel had apparently decided that the universe had placed him in this classroom specifically to talk to every single person in it. He had befriended half the class by the end of the first week. He knew the janitor's name by the second. By the 3rd week, the only person in the room he hadn't had a real conversation with was me. I told myself this was fine. I was not a social person. I didn't need to know Daniel Reyes. Then Mr. Patterson announced a paired essay project on the theme of identity in literature. And before I could mentally calculate who I could reasonably partner with, I heard, "Hey, Marcus, right? You want to work together?" I turned around slowly, already knowing who it was. Daniel was leaning back in his chair, half turned toward me, completely relaxed. He was wearing a dark green hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, and he had a pen tucked behind his ear that he'd clearly forgotten about. "How do you know my name?" I asked. It came out less suspicious than I intended, and more genuinely curious. He grinned. "Patterson does roll call every morning, man?" "I know everybody's name. Had no logical argument against this." "Okay," I said. "Sure." He smiled like I had said something funnier than okay, and turned back around. And I spent the next 20 minutes of class telling myself that the strange, tight feeling in my chest was just allergies. We met at the public library on a Thursday afternoon in late September. When the trees outside were just beginning to turn, Daniel was already there when I arrived, spread out across an entire table with his notes and 3 different books, and an iced coffee that the librarian Ms. Hensley had definitely told him he wasn't allowed to have in there.
You're
2 minutes late, he said. Not looking up. "I'm exactly on time," I said, sitting down across from him. 3 o'clock. "I've been here since 2:45. Finally looked up. "So by my standards, you're late. Your standards are not the official standards." "Tragic," he said, and pushed one of the books toward me. I was thinking we could focus on identity and belonging using The Alchemist, and their eyes were watching God. There's so much material. Patterson's going to love it. I looked at the books, then at him. "You've already thought about this a lot." He shrugged. Identity is interesting. Don't you think so? Something about the way he said it made me feel like the question had a second meaning. But his expression was open and easy, and I told myself I was imagining things. Sure, I said. I guess. He studied me for a second. You say sure and okay a lot. They're practical words. They're defensive words. He took a sip of his forbidden iced coffee. You use them when you don't want to commit to something. I stared at him. We had been in each other's presence for approximately 4 minutes. That's a lot of analysis for someone I barely know, I said. He laughed. A real laugh, and it was warm and unguarded. And I hated how much I liked the sound of it. Fair enough, he said. Let's start with the books. We worked for 2 hours that afternoon. And here's the honest thing. It was one of the easiest conversations I had ever had. Daniel was sharp and funny, and he had opinions about literature that he held loosely. I mean, he was willing to be challenged, and sometimes even changed his mind mid-sentence when I pushed back. He listened when I talked. Actually listened. Not the way some people do, where you can see them waiting for their turn to speak. He looked at me like what I was saying mattered. By the time we packed up, the light through the library windows had gone orange and low. Same time next week, he asked, gathering his books. Yeah, I said. And then, because something in me wanted to be more than a one-word answer for once, this was actually good. Looked at me like I had just handed him something. Yeah, he said. It was. We met at the library 5 more times over the next month. And then, without either of us formally deciding anything, we started meeting there even after the essay was turned in. I learned things about Daniel Reyes, that he had moved to Sycamore Falls 2 years ago from Miami, and that he still sometimes got a look on his face when the weather turned cold, like his body was personally offended by Ohio, that his mother was a nurse who worked double shifts, and his father had been out of the picture since he was 9. Something he mentioned once flatly and then moved past, that he wanted to study journalism, that he made playlists for different emotional states and had opinions. It's about music that were deep and specific and occasionally completely wrong. That he laughed at his own jokes every single time, before the punchline, which somehow made the jokes funnier. That he had a habit of tapping his fingers on the table when he was thinking. A quiet rhythm only he could hear. I cataloged all of this with a growing and terrifying tenderness. I also learned that Daniel was openly gay. He didn't announce it. It simply came up one afternoon in October when he mentioned, offhandedly, a boy from his old school in Miami named Carlos. And the way he described him with a mixture of fondness and old sadness, it's made everything clear without requiring a single word of clarification. He said it the way you say anything about a person you once cared about, easily, naturally. I remember I was reading when he said it, and I kept my eyes on the page, and I said, "What happened with him?" In a voice that I hope came out casual. Daniel was quiet for a moment. We wanted different things, he said. Or he wanted some things and I didn't know I wanted them yet. Moving does something to you. Makes you evaluate. Yeah, I said. You ever been in a relationship? He asked. I turned a page I hadn't read. No, never. I'm focused on other things. He was quiet for another moment. Then, okay. Just okay. He didn't push. He let it sit there, and I loved him for it. And that was the first time the word love showed up in my thoughts about Daniel Reyes. And I closed the book because I couldn't see the words anymore anyway. November arrived cold and sudden, the way Ohio Novembers do. Cross-country season ended and I found myself with more free time than I knew what to do with, which mostly meant more time at the library with Daniel. My friends noticed I was around less and made vague complaints about it, but none of them asked real questions. This was, I realized, both a comfort and a sadness, that the people around me were so used to a surface level version of me that my absence didn't prompt real curiosity. Daniel, on the other hand, asked real questions constantly. What are you afraid of? He asked me one afternoon in November, out of nowhere, while we were both supposedly reading. I looked up. Right now. In general, I thought about lying. I thought about saying something about spiders or failure or some other safe, acceptable fear. Being known, I said instead. and was immediately surprised I had said it. Daniel didn't react like it was strange. He just looked at me with those calm, attentive eyes. Why? Because once someone knows you, they can decide you're not worth it, I said. And if nobody really knows you, nobody can make that call. The words were out before I had examined them, and they sat between us on the table like something fragile. That's really lonely, Daniel said quietly. Yes, I said. It was the most honest I had been with another human being in 4 years. Maybe ever. He looked at me for a long moment. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something steadier than either of those things. Then he went back to his book, and I went back to mine, and neither of us said anything else for a while. And somehow that silence was the kindest thing I had ever experienced. The night everything changed was in December. On a Friday, when the first real snow of the season came down soft and heavy over Sycamore Falls, we had been at the library until it closed. And then we'd walked to the diner on Maple Street because Daniel wanted hot chocolate, and I had learned by then that when Daniel wanted something specific, it was easier and more enjoyable to just go along with it. The diner was warm and nearly empty, just us and an old couple in the corner booth, and a waitress named Greta, who knew Daniel by name because of course she did. We sat in a window booth and watched the snow fall, and we talked about everything and nothing, his journalism dreams, my complete uncertainty about my future, a book we had both read recently, a song he had heard that morning that he made me listen to through one shared earbud. Leaning across the table until we were closer than we usually sat, the song ended. He didn't lean back. Neither did I, Marcus, he said. Yeah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that however you answer, it's fine. Nothing changes. My heart was hammering. Okay? Are you okay? He asked, not in the general sense. I mean, are you okay? Like, inside yourself. Because sometimes you look like someone carrying something very heavy, and you never put it down. And I just want to know if you're all right. I looked at him across that diner table with the snow falling outside and the warm light overhead, and Greta refilling coffee somewhere behind us. And I felt something in my chest crack open very quietly. No, I said. I'm not really okay, he nodded. Slowly, like he had been waiting for this, and wanted to receive it carefully. You don't have to tell me what it is, he said. I know, I said. And then, I'm scared. Of what? I looked at the snow. I looked at my hands. I looked at him. Being the thing that I am, I said. Because I don't know what happens after. The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them, Hey Daniel said very softly. I looked at him. I know what it is, he said. I've known for a while. And you're still the same person you were 60 seconds ago. And I still want to be sitting in this booth with you. And nothing is different. It's a thing that happened in my chest then. I don't have an adequate word for it. It was not happiness exactly, and it was not relief exactly, though it was both of those things. It was more like a door that had been locked for so long, I had forgotten it was a door swinging open, and the air that came through was cool and clean and unfamiliar, and I didn't know yet whether to walk through it. But at least now I knew it was there. My eyes were burning. I looked out the window. I've never said it out loud, I said. To anyone. You don't have to say it now either, he said. I think I want to, I said. I think I need to. I took a breath. I'm gay. 2 words, and the world didn't end. Daniel reached across the table and put his hand briefly over mine just for a moment. Warm and present, and then took it back and said, Thank you for trusting me with that. I wiped my eye with the back of my hand, embarrassed. And he very graciously looked out the window. It's really coming down out there, he said. Yeah, it is. Things shifted after that, though not in the dramatic way I had always imagined. The secret was still a secret from the rest of the world. I wasn't ready for more than one person. Not yet, but the weight of it was different now. Shared weight is lighter. I had read that somewhere and always thought it was a cliché, but it turned out to be simply true. Daniel never made me feel like a project. He never over-referenced what I had told him or treated me like I was fragile. He was just Daniel, funny and direct, and occasionally infuriating and warm in a way that wasn't showy or performed. He was just warm, like sitting near a wood stove on a cold day. You don't make a big deal about it. You just appreciate the heat. We spent winter break texting constantly because the library was closed, and the snow kept us mostly inside. We had long conversations that started at 10 at night and ended at 2 in the morning, about everything from our families to our philosophies, to the particular loneliness of growing up in a place that didn't quite fit you. He told me about Miami, about the weight of leaving, about his mother's sacrifices, about the way he had found himself in a new place and had to rebuild himself almost from scratch, and how that had actually been a gift, even though it hadn't felt like one at the time. You get to decide who you are, he said. During one of those late-night conversations, when everything familiar is gone, you're not performing a version of yourself for an audience who already has expectations. You're just you, figuring it out. I thought about this for a long time afterward. I had been performing a version of myself for an audience with expectations since I was 13 years old. I had been so focused on the performance that I had almost forgotten I was allowed to figure it out. January was bitterly cold, and Daniel started walking home with me after school because our routes overlapped for 6 blocks. And those 6 blocks became the best part of my day. We walked slow, the way you do when you're not in a hurry to arrive somewhere, when the walking itself is the point. He talked. I listened. I talked. He listened. The snow crunched under our feet and our breath made small clouds in the air, and sometimes we walked in a comfortable silence that I had never really experienced with anyone before. It was in one of those silences, on a Tuesday in late January, that Daniel said quietly, "I like spending time with you, Marcus." "I like spending time with you too," I said. We walked another half block. He said, "I like you, specifically. Not just as a friend." I kept walking. One foot, other foot. "I know," I said. "You know? I think I've known for a little while," and his voice was careful, present. I stopped walking. He stopped too and turned to face me, snow falling lightly around us, streetlight making everything soft and orange and still. "I'm scared," I said. "I want you to know that up front. I don't have experience with this, and I'm probably going to be bad at it, and I'm still figuring out a lot of things." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be good at it. I'm just asking if you want to try." I looked at him, this person who had walked into my English class and broken, opened my carefully constructed world simply by being exactly who he was. Without apology, without performance, without armor. I thought about all the years I had spent being afraid of being known. I thought about a locked door and cool, clean air. I said, "I want to try," he smiled. And it was different from all his other smiles, quieter, more careful. Like he was holding something he knew was precious. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. We stood there for a moment in the snow, just looking at each other. Then he reached out and adjusted the scarf around my neck that had been coming loose for the last 3 blocks. Tucking it back into place with gentle, careful hands, he touched me softly. And I couldn't hate him anymore. Not that I ever really had. It had never been hate. It had been fear wearing hate's coat, the way fear often does, walking around in disguise, pretending to be something harder and colder than it really was. What I felt in that moment, standing under an Ohio streetlight in January snow, was the opposite of fear. It was something I was still learning the full shape of, something that had been growing quietly in me since September. Watered by 2 hours in a library, and an iced coffee, and a shared earbud, and a hand placed briefly over mine in a diner booth. Something I didn't have the perfect word for yet. Something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like coming home. We took things slowly. Not because either of us wanted to exactly, but because slowly was what made sense for where I was. Daniel understood this without needing it explained, which told me something important about him. He was patient in the way that comes not from resignation, but from genuine care. He was patient because he wanted me to be okay, not because he was waiting for me to hurry up. We did all the ordinary things that people were becoming something to each other do. We studied together, and argued about books, and shared music, and watched movies in his living room on Friday evenings while his mother was at work, and walked those 6 blocks home in weather that slowly, incrementally, began to warm. I met his mother, Rosa, a compact and fierce woman with Daniel's eyes, who shook my hand and said, "I've heard a lot about you," with a smile that made me feel seen and welcomed in equal measure. In March, I told my sister Danielle was home for spring break, and I told her on a Sunday morning while we were making breakfast. Just the two of us, our parents still asleep. I said it simply, the way I had been practicing saying it without preamble. "I'm gay, and I'm kind of seeing someone." She turned from the stove and looked at me for a long moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and hugged me hard, the kind of hug that says, "I've got you," without any words. "Tell me about him," she said into my shoulder. So I did. I told her about Daniel, about the nod in English class, about the library, about the diner and the snow, about the scarf and the streetlight. I told her all of it, and she listened with her chin in her hand and her eyes bright, and when I was done, she said, "He sounds like exactly the kind of person you needed." I said, "Are you happy?" I thought about the question.